In a small town in Texas, life moved at its own slow pace. People knew each other by face, if not by name. Every afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets, one man could always be found sitting on the same weathered park bench near the local library. His name was John Harper, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and deep lines etched into his face that told stories of battles fought and hardships endured. John wasn't alone. During these quiet moments, by his side sat Max, his loyal German shepherd, whose dark eyes seemed to carry wisdom far beyond what any dog should possess. Together, they formed an unbreakable bond. To anyone passing by, it might have looked unusual, this big man talking softly to his dog. Some days he'd share memories of their time together. Other days he'd recount tales from his past or simply murmur about how peaceful the world felt when everything else faded away. For John, these conversations weren't just idle chatter. They were therapy. After serving 2 tours in Afghanistan where he lost friends he considered brothers, and after returning home to fight demons no one else could see, Max became more than just a pet. He was family, a lifeline. In those whispered words exchanged between man and dog, there was healing, but not everyone understood this connection. One sunny afternoon, as John leaned back against the bench, scratching behind Max's ears, a group of teenagers strolled by. At first, they laughed quietly among themselves, pointing toward John and exchanging smirks. Then one of them grew bolder. "Hey, look at this guy," the ringleader called out loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear. "Talking to his dog like it's some kind of shrink session. What's wrong with you, old man?" The laughter grew louder, echoing through the park. Parents glanced over, some shaking their heads disapprovingly while others ignored the commotion entirely. Children paused mid-play, curious about the sudden tension in the air. John didn't respond. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed firmly on Max, running his fingers gently through the dog's thick fur. Inside, though, something stirred, a mix of anger, sadness, and shame. He'd faced worse insults before, but somehow this sting felt sharper. Maybe it was because he was tired of being misunderstood, tired of feeling invisible. Or maybe it was because deep down he feared they were right, that maybe people like him didn't belong anymore. The leader of the group stepped closer, emboldened by his buddy's snickers. "Maybe he thinks his dog can understand war stories better than people," he jeered, throwing his arms wide dramatically. More laughter erupted around them, bouncing off the trees and mingling with the distant chirping of birds. As the taunts continued, John clenched his jaw tightly, willing himself to stay calm. But then, amidst all the noise, a new voice cut through, like a knife slicing through butter. "You boys think it's funny to make fun of someone who has sacrificed everything for your freedom?" Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Standing nearby was an older man wearing a cowboy hat pulled low over his face and sunglasses hiding his eyes. Despite his casual appearance, there was something commanding about him, something that made even the cockiest teenager hesitate. The teens froze, unsure how to react. Their bravado faltered under the weight of the stranger's presence. Who was this guy? And why did he look so serious? Without waiting for an answer, the man removed, his sunglasses revealing piercing blue eyes that locked onto the group like lasers. "Let me tell you something," he said evenly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "That man you're mocking fought for your right to walk around here without fear, and if I ever catch you disrespecting him, or any veteran again, we'll have words." There was silence. Complete and utter silence. For a moment it felt like time itself had stopped. Then, muttering half-hearted apologies, the teenagers scattered, disappearing as quickly as they'd arrived. As the crowd dispersed, the stranger turned to John. Extending a hand, he introduced himself. "I'm Chuck. Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" And with that simple gesture, the course of John's day, and perhaps his entire life, took a turn none of them could have predicted. The laughter of the teenagers had barely faded when the man in the cowboy hat stepped forward. His boots crunched softly against the gravel path as he moved with purpose, his gait steady and confident. He wasn't shouting or raising his fists, but there was something about him that demanded attention. It wasn't just his commanding presence. It was the way he carried himself, like someone who didn't need to prove anything because he already knew his worth. Chuck stopped a few feet away from the group, tilting his head slightly as if studying them. His voice cut through the air, calm but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. You boys think it's funny to make fun of someone who has sacrificed everything for your freedom? The teens froze mid-laugh, their smirks faltering under the weight of his words. The leader of the group, the one who had been the loudest, tried to brush it off. "It's just a joke, mister," he said, forcing a chuckle. No harm meant. Chuck didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slowly removed his sunglasses, folding them neatly before slipping them into his pocket. When his piercing blue eyes met theirs, the teenagers shifted uncomfortably. They weren't laughing anymore. Their bravado, once so loud and bold, now seemed fragile, like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. "Let me tell you something," Chuck continued, his tone even but laced with authority. "That man over there, you see him sitting quietly with his dog? Do you know what he's done? Do you know the sacrifices he's made? Men and women like him have stood between danger and people like you. They've faced things most of us can't. Even imagine. And also you could walk around here without fear." The group exchanged nervous glances. None of them spoke. One of the teens shuffled his feet awkwardly, while another stared at the ground, avoiding eye contact. For the first time, they realized they weren't dealing with just anyone. This wasn't some random passerby telling them to knock it off. There was something different about this man, something almost intimidating. Finally, the leader tried to laugh again, though it came out strained. "We didn't mean anything by it, okay? Just messing around." Chuck's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened. "Messing around," he repeated, his voice quieter now but sharper, like the edge of a blade. "Is that what you call it? Mocking a man who's given more than you'll ever understand? Let me ask you something. Do you even know what it means to serve? To put your life on the line for people you don't even know?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The teenagers glanced at each other, unsure how to respond. Some of them looked genuinely ashamed, while others seemed more concerned about getting out of the situation as quickly as possible. "If I ever catch you disrespecting him, or any veteran again," Chuck added, his voice rising slightly, "we'll have words. Understand?" There was a long pause. Then, one by one, the teens began to nod. Mumbling apologies, they backed away, their earlier confidence completely gone. Within moments, they were jogging down the path, eager to put as much distance between themselves and the stranger as possible. When they were finally out of sight, Chuck turned his attention to John. Extending a hand, he introduced himself. "I'm Chuck. Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" John hesitated, still processing everything that had just happened. He glanced at Max, who wagged his tail lazily, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. After a moment, John reached out and shook Chuck's hand. "John Harper," he replied gruffly. "Thanks for stepping in back there." Chuck waved off the gratitude with a dismissive gesture. "No thanks needed," he said with a faint smile. "I've been where you are. Sometimes people don't get it, they haven't walked in our shoes." The two men sat side by side on the bench, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Max rested his head on Chuck's knee, earning a gentle pat on the head. "Good boy," Chuck murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. Max closed his eyes contentedly, clearly approving of the new friend. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rustling leaves overhead and the distant chirping of birds. But eventually, Chuck broke the silence. "How long have you had Max?" he asked, nodding toward the dog. John relaxed a little, leaning back against the bench. "About 6 years now," he replied. "Got him not long after I got back from Afghanistan. He's been with me through, well, everything." Chuck nodded knowingly. "He's a good listener," he said, glancing down at Max. "Sometimes, that's all we need, isn't it?" John let out a small chuckle, though it was tinged with sadness. "Yeah, you could say that. People don't always understand what it's like. They try, sure, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. Max doesn't judge. He just listens. Chuck didn't press for details. He understood instinctively that some wounds ran too deep to be put into words. Instead, he changed the subject slightly. You served in Afghanistan? 2 tours, John confirmed. Lost a lot of good men over there. Came home with a few scars of my own. He tapped the side of his temple lightly. Not all of them show on the outside. Chuck nodded again, his expression thoughtful. PTSD? John stiffened slightly, surprised by how directly Chuck had addressed it. Most people tiptoed around the topic, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But Chuck didn't seem fazed. His tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of pity or judgment. Yeah, John admitted after a moment. Still working on it. It's a battle, Chuck agreed. One that never really ends, but you're not alone in it. There are people who get it, who want to help. Before John could respond, a group of joggers appeared in the distance. At first glance, they looked like any other runners passing through the park. But as they drew closer, their uniforms became clear. Camouflage fatigues, worn boots, and Marine Corps insignias gleaming proudly on their sleeves. 5 Marines, part of a local unit training for deployment, slowed to a stop when they spotted Chuck sitting on the bench. "Sir!" one of them exclaimed, snapping to attention and saluting. The others followed suit, their movements crisp and synchronized. Chuck stood up, returning the salute with a grin. "At ease, Marines," he said warmly. Turning to John, he added, "Looks like we've got company." The Marines noticed John then, recognizing the insignia on his jacket. "Semper Fi," one of them shouted, saluting him as well. The others echoed the greeting, their voices filled with respect and camaraderie. John blinked in surprise, momentarily overwhelmed by the unexpected display of solidarity. These men and women didn't know him personally, but they knew what his uniform represented. They knew the sacrifices he'd made, and in that moment, he felt seen. Not as a broken man struggling to find his place in the world, but as a brother in arms. As the Marines gathered around the bench, sharing stories and swapping jokes, the atmosphere transformed. Strangers passing by couldn't help but notice the scene unfolding. A legendary action star, a quiet veteran, and a group of proud Marines united by shared experiences and mutual respect. It was a powerful reminder that even in moments of isolation, connection could be found. And for John, it was the beginning of something he hadn't dared to hope for, a renewed sense of belonging. The park bench, once a quiet corner of solitude for John Harper, had transformed into the center of an unexpected gathering. Chuck Norris stood nearby, exchanging stories with the 5 Marines who had jogged over after spotting him. Their energy was infectious. Loud laughter mixed with heartfelt camaraderie as they shared tales of training exercises, deployments, and the unique bond that only those who've served can truly understand. John watched silently at first, feeling both grateful and slightly overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, especially not like this. But there was something comforting about the way these strangers treated him, not with pity or awkward sympathy, but with genuine respect. They didn't see him as the guy talking to his dog. To them, he was simply another Marine, part of a brotherhood that transcended time and place. One of the Marines, a stocky man with a shaved head and a booming voice, leaned forward eagerly. "Hey, weren't you part of Bravo Company back in I? Oit?" he asked, pointing at the insignia on John's jacket. John nodded slowly, surprised that anyone would remember. "Yeah, I was," he replied. "We trained out of Camp Pendleton before heading overseas." The Marine's face lit up. "No way. My CO served under your unit during that rotation. Said you guys were some of the toughest he'd ever worked." For a moment, John felt transported back to those days. The grueling drills, the late-night strategy sessions, the unshakable trust between teammates. It was a bittersweet memory, tinged with pride, but also loss. Many of the men he'd served alongside hadn't come home. Others had returned only to struggle silently with wounds no one could see. Max must have sensed his owner's shift in mood because he nudged John's leg gently, drawing him back to the present. Chuck noticed too and quickly steered the conversation toward lighter topics. "So what's the story with this big guy?" he asked, gesturing to Max. "How'd you two meet?" John smiled faintly, his gaze softening as he looked down at his loyal companion. "He saved me," he said simply. "Not in the dramatic hero way, though, just day by day. When I first got back, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. Crowds were unbearable. Talking to people? Forget it. Then one day someone suggested getting a service dog. Max came into my life and, well, let's just say things started to get better." The Marines nodded knowingly. One of them, a young woman with a tattoo peeking out from under her sleeve, spoke up. "I know exactly what you mean. My cousin got paired with a dog after his last tour. Says it changed everything for him." "It's more than just having someone around," John added quietly. "Max doesn't care about my past or my scars. He's just here. And sometimes that's enough." The group fell silent for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. These were people who understood what it meant to carry burdens others couldn't see. They didn't need to ask questions or offer solutions. They just listened, nodding in agreement as if to say, "We get it." As the conversation continued, the atmosphere shifted from formal respect to easy familiarity. The Marines began teasing each other about boot camp mishaps while Chuck chimed in with hilarious anecdotes from his own days in the Air Force. Even John found himself laughing, sharing a few lighthearted stories about Max's antics, how he once chased a squirrel straight into a pond, or how he insisted on helping whenever John tried to cook dinner. At one point, Chuck turned to John and said, "You know, we should do something together sometime, maybe organize a barbecue, or a fishing trip. Get a group of vets together, it could be fun." John hesitated, unsure how to respond. Socializing wasn't exactly his strong suit these days. But before he could decline, one of the Marines spoke up. "That's actually a great idea," she said enthusiastically. "There's a veteran support group that meets every Thursday at the community center. You should come check it out, John. Bring Max. He'll be a hit." Her suggestion caught John off guard. For years, he'd avoided anything remotely social, convinced that he wouldn't fit in or that others wouldn't understand. But looking around now, at Chuck, at the Marines, even at the curious faces of passers-by watching the lively scene unfold, he realized that maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe there were people who got it, people who cared. "Maybe I will," he said finally, surprising even himself. The group erupted into cheers, slapping him on the back and making plans for their next meetup. Max wagged his tail furiously, clearly sensing the positive energy surrounding them. By the time the Marines resumed their run, promising to stay in touch, the sun was beginning to set. The golden light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the park. Chuck lingered behind, sitting back down beside John. "You okay?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. John took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Better than I have been in a long time, actually." Chuck nodded approvingly. "Good. You deserve it, you know. All of it. The peace, the friendship, the second chances. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." They sat there for a while longer, watching the world wind down around them. Children chased each other across the grass, couples strolled hand in hand, and somewhere in the distance, a guitar player strummed a soft melody. Life moved on, as it always did. But for John, something fundamental had shifted. He no longer felt invisible. In fact, for the first time in years, he felt seen and valued in a way that filled him with hope. As the evening drew to a close, Chuck stood up, stretching his legs. "Listen, I'm heading out," he said, adjusting his cowboy hat. "But I'll be in town for a few more days. Let's grab coffee or something before I go, yeah?" John nodded, shaking Chuck's hand firmly. "Thanks again," he said, meaning it more deeply than words could convey. "For everything." "No problem," Chuck replied with a wink. "Take care of yourself, and Max, of course." With that, he walked away, leaving John alone on the bench once more. But this time the solitude didn't feel so heavy. Instead, it was peaceful, a chance to reflect on the extraordinary turn his day had taken. From being mocked by a group of teenagers to forming connections with complete strangers who treated him like family, it had been a roller coaster of emotions. And yet, somehow, he felt lighter, as if a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying had been lifted. Max rested his head on John's lap, gazing up at him with those soulful eyes. "What do you think, buddy?" John murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Think we're ready for this?" Max responded with a contented sigh, leaning into the touch. It was answer enough. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, John realized that this wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. For the first time in a long time, he felt ready to take the next step, whatever that might be. Word of what happened in the park spread faster than anyone expected. By evening, social media posts and local news articles began popping up, highlighting the incident. Videos captured by bystanders showed Chuck Norris stepping in to defend John Harper, followed by the arrival of the Marines and the heartfelt camaraderie that unfolded. The story resonated deeply with people, a tale of kindness, respect, and standing up for those who've served their country. For the teenagers involved, however, life became a whirlwind of consequences they hadn't anticipated. Their faces were plastered across online platforms as part of the viral footage, and comment sections lit up with criticism. Some called them out harshly, while others urged forgiveness and understanding. At school, teachers addressed the situation during assemblies, using it as an opportunity to teach empathy and gratitude. Parents grounded them, demanding explanations and apologies. At first, the teens tried to brush it off as bad luck, just a random encounter gone wrong. But as the days passed, guilt began creeping in. They started noticing small things they'd never paid attention to before. The faded uniforms hanging in closets at home, worn by grandparents who rarely spoke about their service. The American flags flying proudly outside houses. Even the simple freedoms they took for granted every day. Slowly, they began to realize the weight of their actions and the importance of the man they had mocked. Determined to make amends, the group returned to the park the following afternoon. They scanned the area nervously, unsure if John would be there or how he might react. To their relief, they spotted him sitting on the same bench, feeding Max treats and staring off into the distance. Taking a collective deep breath, they approached cautiously. "Sir," the leader began hesitantly, his voice trembling slightly. "We're really sorry for what we said yesterday. We didn't mean to hurt you." John looked up, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he simply studied them as if trying to gauge whether their apology was sincere. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said, his tone measured but firm. "Just remember, not everyone carries their scars on the outside." The words hit hard, leaving the teens momentarily speechless. One of them, a lanky boy with glasses, stepped forward timidly. "Is there anything we can do to make it right?" John thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Actually, there is something." He explained that the local Veterans Affairs office often needed volunteers, people willing to lend a hand organizing events, assisting veterans with tasks, or simply spending time listening to their stories. It wasn't glamorous work, but it made a difference. The teens exchanged glances, surprised by the suggestion. Then, almost instinctively, they agreed. Over the next few weeks, they threw themselves into volunteering, showing up after school and on weekends to help wherever they could. At first, they felt out of place, awkward and unsure of how to interact with the veterans. But as they spent more time there, they began to understand the depth of sacrifice these men and women had made. They heard stories of bravery under fire, of losing friends in combat, and of struggling to adjust to civilian life. They saw firsthand the toll PTSD could take, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied returning home, and the resilience required to keep moving forward despite it all. Slowly, their perspective shifted. These weren't just abstract heroes. They were real people with hopes, fears, and dreams just like anyone else. One day, while helping sort donations at the VA office, the teens overheard a conversation between two elderly veterans. One of them mentioned being unable to attend a ceremony honoring his fallen comrades because he couldn't afford transportation. Without hesitation, the teens pooled their money and arranged for a ride, surprising him with the gesture later that week. Seeing the gratitude in his eyes reinforced why they were doing this. It wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about connection. Meanwhile, inspired by the growing momentum surrounding the incident, Chuck Norris decided to use his platform to amplify the message. He partnered with John to launch a campaign aimed at raising awareness about veteran mental health issues. Dubbed Max's Mission in honor of John's faithful companion, the initiative sought to provide emotional support animals to veterans in need and fund programs designed to reduce the stigma around seeking help. Local. Businesses eagerly jumped on board, donating resources and spreading the word. Schools organized fundraisers, from bake sales to charity runs, with students learning valuable lessons about compassion and community along the way. Community centers hosted workshops and panel discussions, inviting veterans to share their experiences and educate others about the challenges they faced. John himself became a central figure in the movement. Encouraged by Chuck and the outpouring of support, he began opening up more about his own struggles with PTSD. With Max always by his side, he visited schools, churches, and community events, sharing his story and emphasizing the importance of reaching out for help. His honesty resonated with audiences, breaking down barriers and sparking meaningful conversations. "I used to think asking for help meant weakness," John admitted during one talk. "But now I know it's the opposite. It takes strength to admit you're struggling. And having someone or something like Max to lean on makes all the difference." The campaign gained national attention, earning coverage on major news outlets and inspiring similar initiatives across the country. People wrote letters to John and Chuck, thanking them for shining a light on an issue too often ignored. Veterans reached out, expressing gratitude for finally feeling seen and understood. Others shared their own stories of healing, creating a ripple effect of hope and solidarity. Through it all, Max remained the heart of the mission. Wherever John went, the loyal German Shepherd was there, wagging his tail and offering quiet comfort to those who needed it most. Strangers would approach wanting to pet him or take selfies with him, and Max obliged graciously, as if he knew his role in bringing people together. As months turned into years, the impact of Max's mission continued to grow. Lives were changed, not just for the veterans who benefited directly, but also for the countless individuals who learned to see beyond stereotypes and recognize the humanity in everyone. The teenagers who had once mocked John became advocates for the cause, speaking passionately about the lessons they'd learned and encouraging others to get involved. And through it all, John found a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a lonely afternoon in the park had blossomed into something far greater than he ever imagined. He no longer felt invisible or burdened by his past. Instead, he felt empowered, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing he wasn't alone. Because sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to spark a chain reaction. And in this case, that act came from a stranger stepping in, a group of Marines showing up, and a dog named Max reminding everyone of the power of unconditional love. As the months rolled by, Max's mission grew from a small local effort into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. What started as a simple idea to honor veterans and raise awareness about mental health became a nationwide movement that touched lives in ways no one anticipated. For John Harper, it was both humbling and transformative. He went from being a man who spent his days quietly talking to his dog on a park bench to becoming a symbol of resilience and hope for countless others. It wasn't easy at first. Standing in front of crowds, sharing deeply personal stories about his struggles with PTSD took courage he didn't always feel. There were moments when his voice wavered or tears threatened to spill over. But every time he looked down and saw Max sitting faithfully beside him, calm and steady, he found the strength to keep going. The bond between man and dog became a living testament to the power of unconditional love and support, a message that resonated deeply with everyone who heard it. Chuck Norris remained a steadfast ally throughout, using his influence to amplify the campaign's reach. He appeared alongside John at events, spoke passionately about the importance of supporting veterans, and even helped secure funding for programs aimed at pairing service members with emotional support animals. Together, they traveled across the country, meeting people whose lives had been changed by their work. One such meeting happened in a small town in Ohio. After a community event, an elderly woman approached John, clutching a framed photograph of her son. Her hands trembled as she held it out to him. "This is my boy," she said softly, her voice cracking. "He came back from Iraq 5 years ago, but he never really came home. Last year we lost him." John felt his throat tighten as he listened. Stories like this weren't uncommon among veterans' families, but hearing them face to face always hit hard. He reached out, placing a gentle hand on hers. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "What was his name?" "Thomas," she replied, smiling faintly through her tears. "He loved dogs. Always wanted one growing up, but we lived in an apartment where pets weren't allowed. I wish he'd had someone like Max." The weight of her words stayed with John long after the event ended. That night, lying awake in his hotel room with Max curled up at his feet, he thought about Thomas and all the others who hadn't made it. It reinforced why what they were doing mattered. Every life saved, every veteran helped, was a victory against the invisible wounds of war. Back home in Texas, the teenagers who had once mocked John continued to volunteer at the VA office. They weren't just checking boxes anymore. They genuinely cared. One day, while helping organize a job fair for veterans, they met a young man named Alex. Like John, Alex had served overseas and returned home struggling to adjust. Unlike John, however, Alex hadn't yet found his footing. He was withdrawn, hesitant to engage with anyone. Seeing an opportunity to make a difference, the teens invited Alex to join them for lunch. At first he resisted, unsure of their intentions, but eventually, curiosity got the better way. Over burgers and fries they talked, not about combat or trauma, but about movies, music, and other everyday topics. By the end of the meal, Alex was smiling, loosening up in a way he hadn't in years. Encouraged by their friendship, Alex began attending more events organized by Max's mission. Slowly but surely he started opening up about his experiences, finding solace in knowing he wasn't alone. Inspired by John's story, he adopted a rescue dog of his own, a scrappy terrier mix named Lucky. Watching Alex form a bond similar to the one John shared with Max reminded everyone involved of the mission's core purpose, healing through connection. Meanwhile, Chuck and John worked tirelessly behind the scenes to expand the initiative. They partnered with organizations specializing in training service animals, ensuring that veterans received not only companionship, but also highly skilled support tailored to their needs. Fundraisers brought in thousands of dollars, enough to fund dozens of placements. Local shelters donated dogs deemed unadoptable due to behavioral issues, giving them a second chance at life alongside veterans who understood what it meant to be given another shot. But perhaps the most profound impact came from the relationships forged along the way. Veterans who had once isolated themselves began reconnecting with the world around them. Families torn apart by misunderstanding found common ground. Communities rallied together, proving that even in divisive times, compassion could unite people from all walks of life. One particularly memorable moment occurred during a charity gala hosted by Chuck. Hundreds of guests filled the grand ballroom, dressed in formal attire and eager to support the cause. When John took the stage to speak, the room fell silent. Clutching the microphone tightly, he began by thanking everyone for their generosity before launching into his story. "I used to think I was broken beyond repair," he admitted, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "That nothing could fix what war had taken from me. But then I met Max. And later I met good people, people like Chuck, like the Marines who showed up in the park that day, like the kids who decided to turn their mistake into something meaningful. They reminded me that I still had value, that I wasn't alone." His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "We can't erase the scars of battle. We can't bring back the ones we've lost, but we can choose to stand together, to fight for each other, because when we do, miracles happen. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even Chuck, seated at a nearby table, wiped away a tear. As the crowd erupted into applause, John stepped back, letting Max take center stage. The dog sat proudly, basking in the adoration of hundreds of strangers who now understood exactly what he represented: loyalty, unconditional love, and the power to heal. Outside the glitz and glamour of galas, the everyday work of Max's mission continued. Support groups sprang up in towns big and small, offering safe spaces for veterans to share their struggles without judgment. Schools implemented programs teaching students about military service and the sacrifices made by those who protect their freedom. Businesses pledged to hire more veterans, recognizing the unique skills and discipline they brought to the workforce. For John, seeing the ripple effect of their efforts filled him with pride, but also gratitude. Gratitude for Max, for Chuck, for the Marines who had shown up in the park, and yes, even for the teenagers who had once mocked him. Without any of them, none of this would have been possible. And so, as the years passed, John settled into his new role, not just as a veteran but as a leader, advocate, and friend. Though Max eventually grew old and passed away, leaving an ache in John's heart that would never fully heal, the legacy of their partnership endured. In his final public appearance before retiring from speaking engagements, John stood before a packed auditorium and delivered one last message. "This isn't about me," he said, pointing to a banner bearing Max's image. "It's about all of us, about remembering the fallen, supporting the living, and never forgetting that even in our darkest moments, there's always light waiting to break through." With those words, he stepped off the stage, leaving behind a movement that would continue to inspire generations to come. Years passed, and the park where it all began remained a quiet sanctuary in the heart of the small Texas town. The old wooden bench that had once been John Harper's refuge became a symbol, a reminder of how one act of kindness could spark change far beyond what anyone might expect. Eventually, the community decided to honor John and Max with a plaque installed right beside the bench. It read, "To those who serve and those who stand by them, in memory of courage, loyalty, and the power of kindness." Every time someone walked by, they couldn't help but pause, reading the words etched into the metal. For many, it was a moment of reflection, a chance to think about sacrifice, resilience, and the invisible battles fought by so many. Children would often ask their parents what the plaque meant, sparking conversations about gratitude and respect. In its own quiet way, the bench continued to inspire, just as John and Max had inspired countless others. Max's passing left a void in John's life that nothing could truly fill. Losing his loyal companion felt like losing a part of himself, but instead of retreating back into solitude, John leaned on the connections he'd built through Max's mission. The veterans, volunteers, and even strangers who had reached out over the years became his extended family. They reminded him daily that Max's legacy lived on, not just in memories, but in the lives he had touched. One day, during a visit to a local animal shelter partnered with the campaign, John met a young dog named Duke. The scrappy mutt had been abandoned and bore scars from a rough past, much like John himself. Something about the dog's eyes, timid yet hopeful, resonated deeply with him. After some hesitation, John decided to adopt Duke, giving both of them a fresh start. Though no dog could replace Max, Duke brought new energy into John's life, wagging his tail furiously whenever John came home and curling up at his feet during quiet evenings. With Duke by his side, John continued visiting schools, community centers, and veteran events. His talks evolved over time, shifting focus slightly toward teaching younger generations the importance of empathy and understanding. He shared stories not only about his military service, but also about the lessons he'd learned from Max and the unexpected friendships that had changed his life forever. "You don't have to be perfect to make a difference," he told students during one assembly. "Sometimes all it takes is showing up, for yourself, for others, or even for a stranger you see sitting alone on a park bench." Chuck Norris remained a steadfast supporter of the cause, continuing to use his platform to advocate for veterans. Long after Max's mission became a household name, He often joked that meeting John had been fate, saying, "If I hadn't walked through that park that day, I wouldn't have realized how much work still needed to be done, and how many good people were ready to step up." The teenagers who had once mocked John grew into adults shaped profoundly by their experience. Some pursued careers in social work or counseling, dedicating their lives to helping others overcome adversity. Others stayed involved with veteran support programs, ensuring that future generations understood the value of service and sacrifice. One of them later wrote a book detailing the journey from ignorance to awareness, donating all proceeds to organizations supporting mental health initiatives for veterans. As the years went by, the movement sparked by John, Chuck, and Max expanded globally. Countries around the world adopted similar campaigns, pairing emotional support animals with veterans and raising awareness about PTSD and mental health challenges faced by service members. People shared videos online of their own dogs comforting veterans, tagging them with Mac's mission. Countless lives were transformed because of it. John eventually slowed down, stepping back from public speaking engagements to enjoy quieter days at home with Duke. Yet his influence endured. Veterans groups invited him to special ceremonies, honoring him not just for his service but for his role in creating a network of support that spanned continents. Schools named scholarships after him, encouraging students to pursue projects focused on community service and compassion. Even Hollywood took notice, producing a documentary about the unlikely chain of events that led to Max's mission. Though John never sought fame or recognition, he accepted these tributes graciously, knowing they weren't really about him. They were about keeping the spirit of Max's mission alive, a testament to the idea that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always hope. Always a chance to turn pain into purpose, mockery into meaning, and loneliness into connection. On a crisp autumn morning, decades after that fateful day in the park, John returned to the bench where it all began. Duke trotted happily beside him, stopping occasionally to sniff the grass or chase a falling leaf. Together they sat quietly, watching the sun rise over the trees. For a while, neither moved nor spoke. Then John leaned down to scratch behind Duke's ears, smiling faintly. "You know, buddy," he said softly, "I used to think I didn't belong here anymore, that maybe the world had forgotten about guys like me. But now I know better. We're not invisible, not really. As long as there are people willing to listen and dogs willing to love, we'll always have a place." Duke responded with a happy bark, licking John's hand affectionately. And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the knowledge that his life had made a difference, John felt at peace. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be struggles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But he also knew something else, something more important, he knew that even in the darkest corners of the human experience, light could shine through. That acts of kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways impossible to predict. And so, as the town woke up around them, John and Duke stayed seated on the bench, guardians of a legacy born out of courage, loyalty, and the simple belief that everyone deserves to be seen.